Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we take a moment to honor a few remarkable lives, stories of vision, courage, and creativity that continue to echo through time. Before we begin, a gentle reminder. If this video moves you, please consider liking and sharing. Your support helps us preserve and celebrate the legacies that shaped the world. Now let's begin the journey.
There are artists whose fame blazes bright and fast, like fireworks, and then there are those whose impact runs deeper, quiet, enduring, meaningful. And Kimbell belonged to the latter. Her life, beginning on June 28, 1932, in New Orleans, was not a loud one, but it was rich with purpose. While the world may most immediately remember her for a handful of film roles during the golden age of American cinema, and Kimbell's journey was far more layered than a studio's credit roll would suggest. She was not merely an actress. She was a force of quiet transformation, one who crossed borders, bridged communities, and dedicated herself to education, arts, and service long after her days under studio lights had passed. From an early age, and demonstrated a natural gift for performance. She made her debut in radio dramas while still a child, lending her voice to stories that captivated American audiences during wartime. There was something deeply sincere in her delivery, a natural empathy that allowed her to breathe life into every line. The transition to film came naturally. In the 1950s, when Hollywood still had one foot planted in its post-war innocence and another tiptoeing toward a new era, and Kimbell stepped onto the scene with grace. She is perhaps best known for her leading role in the 1954 science fiction film Monster from the Ocean Floor, a classic creature feature that, while modest in budget, became a staple of early sci-fi cinema. It was produced by Roger Corman, and Ann's performance stood out amidst the rubber monsters and dramatic ocean shots. Even in the midst of genre tropes and fantastical premises, and maintained a grounded presence. Her intelligence, her resolve, her refusal to play the damsel, these were traits that audiences remembered. Yet Kimbell was never content with stardom as an end in itself. Hollywood, for all its magic, offered women like her limited space to evolve. So, and moved on, not away from performance, but towards something fuller. She studied international relations at the University of Geneva, an uncommon path for a Hollywood actress in the 1950s, and there she found another calling. The world beyond the screen beckoned. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, and devoted herself to international service and cultural diplomacy. Her work with the United States Information Service brought her into communities across the globe. She helped develop theater programs in Africa, trained students in the Middle East, and guided initiatives that use the performing arts not as entertainment alone, but as tools of education and empowerment. For Anne, the stage was sacred, not because it elevated the actor, but because it invited dialogue, empathy, and change. At the heart of her mission was always the belief that the arts had a vital place in the building of a just society. She understood that a play could shift perspectives in a way policy could not. She saw how storytelling could reach across languages, how music and movement could awaken possibility in places where hope was scarce. And so she became a teacher, a builder, a facilitator. Where once she stood under spotlights, now she lit them for others. Later in life, Anne returned to the United States and settled in Colorado, where she became a local cultural champion. She purchased and restored the historic Jones Theater in Westcliff and founded the Westcliff Center for the Performing Arts. It was a gesture both visionary and rooted. In a rural community, she saw the potential for creativity, for fellowship, for transformation, and she gave that potential a home. She brought in actors, directors, and artists. She hosted workshops, festivals, and programs for youth. She turned a quiet mountain town into a sanctuary for art. It would be easy to reduce Kimbell's story to a familiar arc, Hollywood starlet turned philanthropist, but that would miss the spirit that animated her. What defined Anne wasn't the shift from fame to service. It was her unyielding sense of integrity. She had the rare courage to grow, to recognize when a chapter had ended, and to step with grace into the next. She was not seduced by the echo of applause. She was drawn to the deeper, quieter resonance of lasting impact. Even in her final years, and remained curious, engaged, and purposeful. She wrote books, novels, and memoirs, capturing her reflections and adventures with warmth and wit. She mentored others, offering guidance not from a pedestal, but from the experience of a life well lived. And in every endeavor, whether speaking to a group of rural students or overseeing a local production, she carried with her the same belief that had guided her from the beginning, that art mattered, that it could heal, unite, and elevate. And Kimbell passed away on May 16, 2017, leaving behind no scandal, no tabloid headlines, no monuments carved in stone, but instead something subtler and perhaps more lasting. She left behind theaters filled with laughter and light, students who had discovered their voices, communities that had learned to see themselves anew. She left behind the echo of lines spoken in earnest and the legacy of a woman who never stopped performing, not for fame, but for meaning. In the end, Kimbell lived a life shaped not by the arc of a spotlight, but by the curve of purpose. She was proof that an artist's greatest role may not be the one for which they are remembered, but the one that helps others step into their own story. Her life reminds us that the stage is never small if it is used to lift others. And in that, Kimbell was quietly, indelibly magnificent. There are performers who ask to be understood, and then there is Andy Kaufman, a man who dared the world not to understand him. Born on January 17, 1949, in New York City and raised in Great Neck, Long Island, Andy was a child who saw the world not as a fixed reality, but as a pliable stage, a thing to bend, twist, and toy with until truth and illusion became indistinguishable. He was not a traditional comedian because he never wanted to be. What Andy Kaufman sought was not laughter, but reaction. Not applause, but authenticity. His life was a performance piece that refused to end even when the curtain fell. From his earliest years, Andy exhibited a fascination with impersonation and character. He would perform Elvis Presley routines in his bedroom mirror and host imaginary television shows for his younger siblings. But what seemed like mere mimicry to others was, for Andy, a spiritual ritual. He wasn't trying to mock or imitate. He was trying to become. That yearning to transform, to disappear into a role so completely that he erased himself, would define his life's work. When Kaufman emerged into the public eye in the 1970s, the American comedy scene was in a moment of transformation, with stand-up growing darker, more self-aware, and politically charged. But Andy sidestepped that movement altogether. He wasn't interested in satire or commentary. He stepped on stage and read The Great Gatsby aloud until half the audience walked out. He impersonated a foreign man named Lotka Gravis so convincingly that audiences wondered if he spoke English. And in what may be his most famous gag, he performed as the smarmy lounge singer Tony Clifton, a grotesque alter ego complete with fake mustache, cheap sunglasses, and an unbearable arrogance. Many never realized that Clifton was Kaufman, sometimes even when Kaufman was in the room. It was never about jokes. It was about breaking the contract. The unspoken pact between performer and audience that says, I will perform and you will laugh. Andy refused. He flipped the contract inside out. He made people uncomfortable. He provoked silence, confusion, anger. Sometimes, that anger turned into something greater, a revelation. Audiences didn't know what was real. And in that moment of doubt, Andy felt he had succeeded. His role as Lotka on the hit sitcom Taxi brought him into mainstream fame, but Andy didn't cherish celebrity. He saw it as another mask. On Taxi, he played the sweet, naive mechanic with a foreign accent, beloved by millions. But off stage, he would sabotage press events, arrive in character as Tony Clifton, or insist on having his own comedy intermissions during tapings. To the public, it was baffling. To Andy, it was a test. Could truth survive the machine of fame? Perhaps his most polarizing act came when he declared himself the intergender wrestling champion of the world and began wrestling women on national television. It was an act that bordered on farce and cruelty. He taunted his opponents, bragged of his superiority, and fueled crowds with a toxic charisma. Critics called him misogynistic. Fans were divided. But again, Andy wasn't chasing admiration, he was asking questions. How far would people go for spectacle? Could absurdity reveal something truer than sincerity ever could? His wrestling feud with professional wrestler Jerry Lawler became legendary. They brawled on late night with David Letterman, exchanged televised threats, and fed an ongoing story arc that blurred fiction and reality. It wasn't revealed until years later that the feud had been entirely staged, a performance piece that fooled millions. That was Andy's greatest satisfaction. Not that people believed, but that they felt something real. Andy Kaufman believed in the spiritual power of performance. He dabbled in transcendental meditation, spent time in solitude, and read voraciously on topics ranging from Eastern philosophy to classic vaudeville. He once claimed he never told a joke in his life. And perhaps he didn't. Because what he did wasn't comedy. It was ritual. He treated laughter the way others treat silence. In it, he found transcendence. He was a man at war with the idea of being pinned down. At a time when audiences demanded to know what was real, Andy responded with layers upon layers of masks. He wasn't trying to protect himself, he was challenging others to question the authenticity of everything. In an age of canned laughter and television tropes, he offered something subversive: unpredictability, the possibility that anything at any time could spiral into chaos. In 1983, Andy was diagnosed with a rare form of lung cancer. But even in illness, the performance continued. Some refused to believe it was true. Rumors swirled that he had faked his death as the ultimate prank. Conspiracy theorists claimed sightings for years. Friends insisted he had spoken often of such a stunt. And when he died on May 16, 1984, at the age of 35, many simply refused to believe it. To this day, the legacy of Andy Kaufman is steeped in mystery. Was he a genius or a fraud? A prophet or a prankster? For his admirers, he was a revolutionary who challenged the very meaning of entertainment. For his detractors, he was a provocateur who mistook confusion for brilliance. But one thing is undeniable: he changed the rules. He made comedy dangerous again. He opened doors to performance art, absurdist theater, and metacomedy that countless others have since walked through. Jim Carrey's portrayal of him in the film Man on the Moon brought a new generation into the orbit of Kaufman's strange genius. But even Carrey, in his immersive, often disturbing preparation for the role, confessed that Kaufman's essence remained elusive, like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. Andy Kaufman didn't want to be loved. He wanted to make people think. He wanted to push them out of comfort and into curiosity. He wanted to dissolve himself into the moment so completely that he disappeared and left only the echo of a question. What did we just see? Perhaps that is the greatest act of all. Andy Kaufman may have died, but the performance continues. Every time a boundary is broken on stage, every time a comedian risks silence instead of applause, every time truth is twisted just enough to make us look again, Andy is there, laughing. Not at us, but with us. Because for Andy, the show never ends. It just changes form. André Lurton was a man whose life and legacy were rooted as deeply in the soil of Bordeaux as the vines he so lovingly cultivated. Born on October 4, 1924, in the heart of the Entre-deux-Mers region of France, Lurton came from a long line of winegrowers, but he did not simply inherit the tradition, he transformed it. Over the course of more than 6 decades, André became one of the most powerful and visionary figures in the Bordeaux wine world, helping to define the modern identity of a region that has long stood as a global symbol of prestige and terroir. From a young age, André understood that wine was not just a product. It was a philosophy, a cultural emblem, a dialogue between land, climate, and human craft. After serving in World War II, he returned to his family's modest holdings and began the slow, patient work of rebuilding and expanding what would eventually become an empire of vineyards. Where others saw risk, he saw potential. He was instrumental in reviving forgotten appellations, elevating undervalued terroirs, and fighting for the recognition of Bordeaux whites, long overshadowed by their red counterparts. By the 1960s, André Lurton had emerged as a driving force behind the renaissance of the Pessac-Léognan appellation. His tireless lobbying efforts led to its official recognition in 1987, a testament to both his political savvy and his deep understanding of viticultural heritage. But his achievements were not just bureaucratic, they were deeply agricultural. He personally oversaw the development and restoration of numerous estates, including the now celebrated Château La Louvière, Château de Creusot, and Château Quihines-Lurton, each a testament to his refined palate and relentless dedication. Lurton's style as a winemaker combined traditional sensibilities with an openness to innovation. He championed sustainable vineyard practices long before they became fashionable and understood that quality was born not just in the cellar, but in the vineyard rows, the canopy management, and the rhythm of harvest. For him, a bottle of wine was never just commerce. It was memory, landscape, and legacy in liquid form. In 2017, well into his 90s, André Lurton was still a commanding presence in Bordeaux. Though he had begun to pass the reins of his company, Vignoble's André Lurton, to the next generation, his vision continued to shape its future. At that time, his vineyards stretched over 600 hectares, making him one of the largest and most respected private landowners in the Bordeaux region. Yet despite his success, he remained grounded, a farmer at heart, more at ease walking through rows of Sauvignon Blanc than speaking from a stage. André Lurton passed away in 2019, but his influence remains etched into the hills and bottles of Bordeaux. He was not merely a custodian of French wine tradition, he was one of its great authors, a man who lived through history and left behind a harvest that continues to speak in every glass. Mabel Pessen was not a figure who courted the spotlight, yet her work reshaped how historians and economists understood the soul of the American working class. Born in 1915, in a time of deep social divides and industrial transformation, Mabel grew up with an innate sensitivity to the silent struggles of ordinary people. Her early years were marked by curiosity and a strong sense of justice. As a child of immigrants in a rapidly changing nation, she saw firsthand how social structures either lifted or crushed entire communities. That early awareness would evolve into a lifetime of careful scholarship, one built on empathy and clarity. Mabel came of age during a period of profound global upheaval, the Great Depression, the rise of labor unions, and 2 world wars. Rather than distance herself from the noise of the times, she immersed herself in it. Education was her gateway. She pursued historical studies not merely to analyze dates and documents, but to make sense of the economic forces that shaped people's lives. Her academic path eventually led her to the City University of New York, where she would not only teach but also become one of its most respected historians of labor and class. Her work challenged the dominant narratives of American prosperity. In an era when many scholars still focused on the achievements of elites, Mabel turned her gaze to the workers, to the nameless, the overlooked, the ones whose sweat built cities and powered economies. She asked questions that others avoided. Who really benefited from industrialization? What myths had grown up around social mobility in America? And most importantly, what truths did working-class families carry that the textbooks ignored? Her book Riches, Class, and Power Before the Civil War was a watershed moment in American historiography. With careful research and powerful prose, she dismantled the illusion that America had always been a land of open opportunity. Instead, she showed how wealth and power concentrated in the hands of the few, long before the Gilded Age. Her arguments were bold, but always rooted in evidence. For Mabel, history wasn't about nostalgia, it was about accountability. Beyond her writing, Mabel Pessen was a committed educator. Students remembered her not just for her intellect, but for her quiet passion and unwavering belief in truth. She encouraged young historians to look beyond the surface, to challenge what they read, and to seek the stories buried in silence. In her classroom, the past was never dead. It was alive, immediate, and urgent. Mabel passed away in 2004, leaving behind not only books and lectures, but a legacy of critical inquiry and moral clarity. In an academic world often distracted by theory and jargon, she reminded everyone that history was, above all, human. And through her work, the forgotten voices of America's laboring millions found one of their fiercest and most compassionate champions. Ashley Massaro lived a life that moved at the speed of adrenaline, bold, blazing, and brief. Born on May 26, 1979, in Babylon, New York, she was a child of Long Island's energy, tough, vibrant, ambitious. From an early age, Ashley exuded a kind of raw charisma, a magnetic force that seemed destined for a bigger stage. But while her name would one day light up arenas and television screens, the path she walked was never easy, and her story carries not just the sheen of celebrity, but the depth of struggle, resilience, and heart. Ashley's first steps into the spotlight came through the world of modeling. Her punk rock edge and rebellious beauty made her stand out in a sea of conventional faces. She wasn't cookie cutter, she was real. She brought the street with her, the attitude, the swagger, the unapologetic voice. That authenticity caught the eye of World Wrestling Entertainment, WW, which was then looking to evolve its image, and Ashley would soon become one of its most electric figures. In 2005, she exploded onto the national stage by winning the WWE Diva Search, beating out thousands of hopefuls and capturing the hearts of fans with her punk style, fierce confidence, and refusal to be ignored. From that moment forward, she was a whirlwind inside and outside the ring. Though she was not a lifelong wrestler, Ashley took her craft seriously. She trained hard, took hits, and committed herself to learning the ropes, literally and figuratively. Every suplex, every dive, every storyline was performed with an energy that could not be faked. Ashley's popularity soared. With her signature pink-streaked hair and rock star energy, she stood out in an era still trying to reconcile athleticism and showmanship in women's wrestling. She represented a bridge between the old guard of beauty-driven entertainment and a rising demand for authenticity and grit. In the ring, she may not have been the most technically polished, but what she brought to the squared circle was undeniable passion and a deep respect for the fans. She performed with everything she had, even when her body was pushed to the limits. Beyond the ropes, Ashley became a pop culture fixture. She graced the cover of magazines, appeared on the reality competition Survivor, China, and developed a devoted fan base who saw in her something refreshingly different. She wasn't untouchable. She was someone people felt they could know, fiery, flawed, and fiercely loyal. She represented, for many, the girl who fought her way into the spotlight without losing her voice. But fame, as it so often does, came with shadows. Ashley battled chronic injuries sustained during her wrestling career, including concussions and long-term physical pain. The toll of the ring is not always visible, but it is real, and for Ashley, it haunted her beyond her days in the spotlight. In interviews later in life, she spoke about the grueling demands of the wrestling industry and the strain it put not just on her body, but on her mental health. These were not words of bitterness. They were the reflections of someone who had lived through fire and wanted others to know the cost of chasing glory. In the years after she left WWE in 2008, Ashley kept searching for meaning and stability. She devoted herself to her daughter, Alexa, who was the center of her world. She worked with various charities, especially those supporting troops and veterans, and never stopped trying to reconnect with fans. She was always aware that the persona she had built in wrestling was bigger than her, but she never resented it. She just wanted to be seen as a full person, not only as an entertainer. Ashley also spoke candidly about the pain she had carried, about trauma, about being dismissed, about not being believed. It takes courage to be vulnerable in public, especially in a culture that still too often expects strength to come without tears. Ashley's willingness to speak out, even when it cost her professionally, made her a quietly powerful figure in conversations about mental health, injury, and justice in sports entertainment. Tragically, Ashley's life ended far too soon. On May 16, 2019, just 10 days before her 40th birthday, she was found unresponsive at her home in Long Island. The cause was ruled suicide. The news sent shockwaves through the wrestling community and beyond. Fans, friends, fellow wrestlers, everyone who had known her or been touched by her work, grieved a loss that felt both deeply personal and emblematic of something larger. She had seemed on the verge of a comeback. She had recently signed to appear at wrestling events again. She had spoken of hope, but the inner battles she fought were immense. In death, Ashley Massaro became a kind of symbol of the untold costs behind the glamour of sports entertainment, of the need for better care for performers, of the human beings beneath the characters. But she was more than a cautionary tale. She was a mother, a fighter, a friend, and a voice that echoed even when silenced. Her legacy is not just in matches or magazine covers. It lives on in the fans who felt seen by her defiance, in the women wrestlers who came after her and found more space to be athletes and storytellers. It lives in her daughter, in the laughter she left behind, in the fierce fire she carried into every room she entered. Ashley Massaro's life was not polished. It was complicated, messy, brave. She wasn't perfect, and that's what made her powerful. She was real. And in a world that often rewards masks, Ashley gave us herself, flawed, beautiful, broken, blazing. She remains a figure of complex inspiration, a reminder of how much one person can carry, how much one voice can matter, and how urgent it is to listen, to care, and to never forget that even those who shine brightest can burn out too soon. In their memory, though they are no longer with us, their contributions to music, entertainment, and culture continue to inspire and shape the world today. Their legacies live on, reminding us of the impact one can leave behind. Thank you for watching. RIP Daily Update.